Hello and welcome to the webinar today. We're so happy to have you with us. This is always my favorite day of the month, is having these webinars because we always have interesting things to talk about. And we do have a special guest speaker today, but first I'm going to answer a couple of questions that came in because, you know, we like to leave it open to every question, irregardless of what our topic is. But we have somebody who wrote in and their phrenic nerve had been damaged during open heart surgery. And so they're kind of worried about this. Naturally, I would be as well. And so one physician had told her that it will recover and it'll take about 6 months. And probably that is correct. I don't know all the details of the injury, just that it was injured, but it is a nerve that's outside the central nervous system. And those are peripheral nerves. And so that nerve will regenerate itself. It usually takes about 1 inch per month for those nerves to regenerate. And now I don't know how severely it's damaged. So, you know, that's another factor. But just speaking in generalities, wherever the injury is along that nerve, it will take about 1 inch per month to regenerate itself. So like if I had an injury up here in my shoulder, I would have, you know, like 36 months or longer till it got recovered down to my fingertips. So it does take a long time, but at least it does that. So, you know, be optimistic on that one. And then another question, in fact, there have been several questions about the COVID and the long COVID and the injection schedules and all that. Well, let's start with the long COVID. On the one hand, you know, we don't know that much about COVID and the recovery from COVID because we're living it as it's occurring. So we do know that people do get recovery. We do know that it takes time. If you have paralysis, it might take a bit longer for you to have recovery, but it can be a difficult recovery in losing energy. I know this person had written in that they were having some breathing issues. So just be wary and watchful and keep up with your exercise as you're able to tolerate it. You might want to talk to your physician about some gentle exercises that you can do to help build up your strength, keep your body in good function, doing your range of motion, that sort of thing, to keep yourself as healthy as you can, watching your diet, taking in fluids, moving your body, or have someone move it for you so that you can help your recovery. Another question was about, in the same vein, was about when they should get their next booster shot. Well, I don't know how many boosters you've had. I can relate to this because having a health issue, it's important to me that I get all these shots. It makes a difference of life and death for me because I don't have a functioning spleen. And that's the captain of the immune system. So it's very important. So I have had all the shots, all the boosters. And now they say that we should wait until a year and then we'll have another booster and it'll be like a flu shot that we'll get every year. And perhaps it might integrate into the flu shot and might become one vaccination instead of two. So I don't know how many boosters that you've had so far. So check with your healthcare professional because your healthcare issues are as unique as mine. And so you want to check with your healthcare professional to make sure that you are getting what you need to get if you are electing to do that. So, you know, those are all personal choices, but know the risk and the benefit. So the risk of getting COVID are pretty severe if you have paralysis because of autonomic deficiencies. So your autoimmune system might not be working as it should, like mine. So, you know, for different reasons, but, you know, we all have things that are going on. So check with your healthcare professional just to make sure that you're up to date if you are concerned about that. Now, today we've got a 2-for-1. We have a guest speaker today. It's very exciting to have this speaker. He actually works in the Department of Homeland Security in Washington, D.C., which is pretty cool. So I thank you for that because we all need some security right now. There's a lot going on out there in that world. But he also has some media that he puts out called He's on Wheels. And Justin Graves is here with us today. Hello, Justin, and welcome. It's very nice to have you with us today. And today we're going to talk a bit about travel because he's an experienced traveler, but he's also an advocate. So we'd like to delve into that, and we've had some questions about advocacy. So we need to do both of these topics today. So we're going to start off with travel, and Justin, tell us a little bit more about yourself and your travels.
Absolutely. So yeah, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm so grateful to continue this partnership with the Reeve Foundation. And really, it's kind of a dream come true. To explain a little bit about myself would really probably have to start with a story from when I was in kindergarten. And a couple of years before I was a kindergarten student, I gained my disability. I was 3 years old when I became paralyzed. And my kindergarten teacher, a woman named Donna Rothstein, basically, I don't remember exactly how it happened, but I remember her handing me a picture of Christopher Reeve, dressed as Superman in the Superman movies from like the late 80s. And given that it was a couple of years after I had gained my paralysis, she basically explained to me, like, here is this man who lives a wonderful, full life. And just because you're using a wheelchair to get around doesn't mean that you can't do the same exact thing. And so looking back at my past 30 some odd years of life, I'm really so grateful for that exposure and really that inspiration from Mrs. Rothstein to say, hey, you can look at someone else who might be able-bodied and you can do the same exact thing that they're doing. Sometimes you just have to do it a little bit differently. And that was a big piece of advice that my parents gave me too. So when we talk about traveling, I really think back to traveling like with my parents, as probably every person does, right? Like if you're going on a family trip, like a family vacation, my earliest memories of that really begin with my parents. And I was probably in middle school by the time I realized how much extra like effort and energy and foresight it was required for them to put into traveling with a kid with a disability. So a little bit about me, I am the youngest of three. So I have an older brother and an older sister, and my mom and my dad. That's my immediate like nuclear family. And when I was born, I don't remember much about when I was a very little kid, but the story about how I became paralyzed, like I said, it happened when I was 3 years old. And I was at my babysitter's house. And I'm told from nurses and family members that I literally laid down for a nap. And then when I woke up from that nap, I couldn't feel my legs. And it was almost that instant. And after many, many months, and if not a full year, I believe, of hospital stays and going to see different specialists, I ended up being diagnosed with transverse myelitis. So transverse myelitis is, I'll explain it for those of you who might not be familiar. Transverse means across, like width, and myelitis, inflammation. So it was a viral inflammation across the width of my spinal cord. And that was in 1993. So yeah, I, very soon thereafter began learning how to use a wheelchair, and I've been paralyzed ever since. I'm 32 as we sit here today in 2023. So going on almost 30 years. So that's a little bit of a background about me, and specifically with regard to my disability. Like I said, my family, I've got two wonderful older siblings, two great parents. I credit my parents a lot with pretty much everything I'll probably share here today. My mom and my dad, I am the presidents of their fan club. I think I humbly say they did a really thoughtful job raising a person with a disability. We can come back to that later. And then just general other stuff. I'm based out of Northern Virginia, just outside of Washington, D.C. I work full time. I'm very grateful to work remotely. Unfortunately, I do have a lot of health challenges that I'm sure a lot of us on this call either experience or help take care of those who experience things like bed sores, pressure sores. Gosh, the list goes on. Chronic pain, physical therapy, occupational therapy, pretty much the whole kit and caboodle that comes along with using a wheelchair day in and day out. But at the end of the day, I've always had a really big goal to not let that hold me back. Whether it's, going to college independently as a teenager, to living independently now as an adult, I've always been really focused on approaching any challenge in a way that is as independent as possible. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Well, I think that's pretty marvelous attitude. And I think that I wish we could all adopt that attitude, paralysis or not. When you have that kind of upbringing of, no boundaries, that's wonderful. Well, boundaries within reason. Let's put it that way.
Mhm.
I'm not going to say absolutely no boundaries, but I love the fact, so many people who had an injury or disease and became paralyzed as younger people credit their parents. And it really makes a difference. I think sometimes people don't really realize how that really makes such a huge difference in people's lives. And as you get older, that support system from relatives, friends, all of that is so critical, just so critical. So it's nice to see that you have done that and that you are so successful in doing so, because that's such a good, it's such a good thing to be able, it just makes your life happier if you're able to accomplish things. So you're out working. Do you travel a lot for your job, or do you travel a lot for your passion?
So I am grateful that you phrased the question that way, because I often tell people that I have my day job and then I have my passion job. And a lot of times they both kind of fill my cup in similar but different ways. So my day job, I don't travel too much for my day job. I honestly am really focused on in my day job. I run our awards and recognition program. So I'm just foundationally, a big value of mine in every area of life is gratitude. So I'm really grateful to be the side of like the human capital or human resources office that is bringing good news and not usually bad news to someone. It's usually in a bonus or an award or at a boy, at a girl, good job, kudos, that kind of thing. So I also work a lot in terms of recruitment. So with the COVID-19 pandemic that we are hopefully finally kind of, coming out of, the posture for our office has been as remote as possible. And our specific office within Homeland Security, we've received a lot of kudos for how we've been able to not only continue to perform, but perform even better in a remote posture than a lot of folks were able to when they were faced with a 90-minute commute one way. And remote work, of course, also really enables people like myself who suffer from chronic pain, who, have to do all kinds of different healthcare administration that really consumes a lot of your bandwidth as a person who's, maybe organizing prescriptions or wound care supply orders and things like that. So all of those challenges are definitely made a little bit easier by not having to commute 3 hours on a daily basis into Washington, D.C. So not so much travel for work, but I do get to travel a little bit for my passion job, which I'm so, so grateful for, because I absolutely get all of my energy from meeting people. Like, I am an extrovert to my core. I'll never forget, I had a mentor in graduate school who really kind of flipped on its head the definition of an introvert versus an extrovert for me, because I have almost always identified as an extrovert, but I thought in the past that being an introvert was like some bad thing. Like it was, not as good as being an extrovert. But that mentor, Frank Shushak, Dr. Shushak, thanks if you're listening. He said to me, Justin, it's really just about how people re-energize themselves. Almost anyone can probably socialize and engage with people, but introverts will more often get their energy from, kind of retreating and being, in their own safe space, whereas an extrovert can simultaneously recharge while they're around other people. So by virtue of getting energy and being around other people, I really do enjoy traveling and being able to meet people, whether it's through a motivational talk with He's on Wheels, or even if it's just for a vacation, or even if it's just, taking a stroll around the block because I've been sitting at my desk all day for my job. I really, really enjoy traveling. So for the biggest, kind of portion of my life in the past 15 years or so, I would say traveling has definitely become more challenging, but it's always a challenge that I am willing to take on because I get so much out of it. And I always encourage people to, when they're thinking about traveling, to really think about like a little, not to be too technical here, but like a cost benefit analysis. Like, how much is it going to take out of you? But then also, how much might you gain by going on that trip, whether it's a week-long cruise, or maybe it's just a long weekend, but it's a staycation, because that can be some kind of vacation as well. It's really important to make that analysis of like, okay, how much planning am I going to have to put into this before I do it, and how much energy will I then have to recoup on the back end, whether or not I'm introvert versus extroverted, whether or not I've got a certain therapy that I might have to reschedule when I get back. All of those things, you have to have that foresight when you're starting to think about, okay, am I going to take on this opportunity to travel or not?
So something you said in there, something stood out to me. Well, all of it stood out to me, but something in particular was, you said it's become more difficult. And why do you think that has, we should talk about it first, but when you said that, I thought, has it become more difficult lately? Is it because of the environment? Is it because of just moving from place to place, getting into vehicles or some kind of transportation? Why is it more difficult?
That's a great question. And I would definitely start with the way I try to phrase things in as positive a way as possible, but I'm also going to be very honest.
Honest is what we're looking for.
Absolutely, right.
Yeah.
The real lack of attention. That's how I'll say it. Lack of attention that usually I would find in a customer service setting. And specifically what I mean by that is, that as people with disabilities, I think that especially if you've lived with a disability for any longer than a week, you begin to think about what accommodations you require in order to function comfortably in any environment. And having done this for 30 years, I'm pretty familiar with the accommodations that I need. And I also am very direct. I communicate, and I tried my best to communicate very directly. And if I'm going to a restaurant, I'll call ahead and make sure that there's accessible seating. If I'm going to a particular movie theater, I'll check and see, like, okay, let me make sure there are wheelchair accessible restrooms. If I'm going to an airport, I'm almost always identifying, like, okay, if I'm flying back home out of the same airport, then I know that's where that restroom is that I'm going to have to hit as soon as I get off of the airplane. Those kinds of things. But those are all environment based. The other kind of accommodation that I often encounter is the people-based accommodations. So when someone is maybe trying to make the best out of a built environment that is not accessible. And the unfortunate reality is that a lot of times people don't necessarily understand what it means to be thoughtful with regard to an accommodation. And I'll give you an example. One of my favorite establishments in Washington, D.C. that I go to probably monthly is the 930 Club. It's a concert venue. It's just a really highly rated concert venue. If you Google it, it's like every band ever has played here. And I really enjoy live music. It's one of the bigger reasons why I end up traveling, honestly. And the 930 Club, it's in a much older building, and it is 2 floors, but there is no elevator. And I cannot comfortably traverse stairs. I cannot walk at all. And I usually am not comfortable with someone that I don't know lifting me up and down stairs in my wheelchair. So the 930 Club, though, it might surprise you to learn, is one of my absolute favorite venues. The reason for that is that I can call the 930 Club, as can any person with a disability, whether it's a sprained knee and they're on crutches, or they're a quadriplegic, or they're paralyzed like myself. You can call the venue and ask for a specific section in the venue to be taped off. That they don't put ADA on it, but I call it the ADA box, basically, because it is the known understanding that you have to then speak to a staff member at the venue in order to gain entrance to that box. And it's not anything fancy, it's just taped off on the floor, but it is closer to the front of the stage and the front of the crowd, so that someone who is seated like myself can still see and enjoy the show. And that's what I mean by awareness. Sometimes it really takes a human being who cares in order to make an environment that is otherwise not accessible. The example I just gave with the 930 Club, they do a great job of that. They are definitely the exception. They are not the rule. 9 times out of 10, when I go places and I'm calling ahead to ask about accessibility, if I get an answer too quickly, then that's how I know I need to do some more research. If I call and I say, hi, my name's Justin, I'm coming at this time. Is your place wheelchair accessible? And like, oh yeah, we're accessible, don't worry about it.
Mhm.
Okay, now I'm stressed. Like you didn't take nearly enough time to think about, okay, well, what do you mean by accessible? Do you need wheelchair accessibility? Do you need a wheelchair accessible restroom? Those are the kinds of questions that a typical able-bodied person might not think to ask.
Right.
But if that person does ask those questions, and that kind of keys me in, and that gives me the confidence and really the peace of mind as I begin traveling to say, okay, I've done my call ahead. I'm a little confident that it's going to be accessible. And even if it's a brand new place somewhere that I haven't been before, I can at least say, okay, the awareness is there. But like I said, 9:30 Club, that example I just gave is definitely the exception. And you often do have to do that advanced work. You kind of have to, I like to call it casing the place. You can go on Google, or you can call the venue directly, or the restaurant, wherever you're going, and ask those questions and really define what you as the individual need in terms of accessibility. That's gotten harder and harder over the years, whether it's people not necessarily understanding what I mean by accessible, even after I explain it, or over promising and under delivering. That's the worst. So.
Well, and I think in our culture, we have moved to this lack of human contact culture where you go to the store, you check out yourself, you don't interact with people. Things have gotten more robotic, but also I think that people are often, they're not being hurtful or mean. They just don't have the experience. I know when I go to some restaurants with someone who's in a chair, and the hostess or the host has a little sheet, and they have to give, each service person, they go to the first people that come in go to table A because that's the geographic location for this service person. Then the next table you have to go to another section, the next people that come in, because that's another, and they divide the work up equally amongst the servers. But when you go in with somebody in a chair, and well, now things are a little bit more spread out because of COVID. They moved the tables. They don't have the tables so crammed together, but you go into a restaurant and you have to weave your way back into the back because this server, or you go up to the table, and then I'm the one who, but I don't mind, but I'm the one who has to move the chair out of the way. Sometimes they'll ask you, would you like the chair moved? Or, and all those things are so considerate, but people are not aware, because they just don't have the exposure. And that, sometimes like you say, you want to go someplace, but you really have to investigate. And the burden lies, I guess, on the person.
It does.
Out.
And if I may really kind of highlight one thing that you just shared, Nurse Linda, is the piece of going to a restaurant and being asked whether or not I want the chair to be moved. That is that honestly can make my day.
Yes. Yes.
It's, like you said, so thoughtful, because the
yes.
assumption usually is, oh, I'm just going to take this chair away. But I'll be honest with you, I will do an assessment of the other chair. I'll say okay, is it me? How sturdy is the back? How much padding is on there? Is that chair more comfortable than mine? Probably not, honestly, because my chair's pretty great. But I love being given that choice, and that choice.
Absolutely. And a place up by the door. I mean, sometimes you want to be closer to the window. Sometimes you want to be closer to the stage. If you're at your club, you want to be, there's sometimes you have different things, but you have to try to wind your way into these different restaurants. Sometimes it just drives me crazy, but so there's somebody who wrote in. First of all, Emily's has written in, and it credits her parents a lot too. So she's on the same wavelength as you. So
parents.
Yeah. So, somebody wrote in, how do you get up the stair at the 9:30 Club?
I don't.
Upstairs?
I've never been upstairs at the 9:30 Club. And I'm honestly pretty resistant to it. A quick anecdote. At the 9:30 Club, I recently went there with one of my best friends, and their coat check. And, it's winter right now. It's February 2023 as we talk today, and the coat check is upstairs. And that night, as I was getting dressed, again, just that foresight and that planning, I literally said to myself, okay, well, I do not want to have I'm not going to go upstairs to check my coat, and I really would not rather place that responsibility to someone else. So I'm going to wear my entire thing that I wore that night was dictated around the fact that the coat check was not accessible. Now, granted, I think it's the kind of venue where if I had asked someone to check my coat for me, I'm sure they would have done it. And I definitely know my friends who were all checking their coats would have done it for me graciously, no questions asked. But it's just one of those things where it's like, if it's not accessible, I don't even really want to entertain it. And that's a value that I kind of live with. Even, if there's a restaurant that I really want to try, but they are not only not accessible, but don't really give an effort towards being accessible. I'm like, well, then you just don't get my patronage today. I'll find somewhere else that is accessible and support them. And yeah, it's kind of a weird, like nuanced thing, maybe a quirk, but I live by that.
Well, and what's deemed accessible is often not.
That's
So
right.
whatever the rules happen to be at the time. So when you travel, do you go in a manual chair? Do you ever use a powered chair? And do you have tips for people who use different kinds of methods of getting around?
Absolutely. So when I travel, always a manual chair. I only own a manual chair. As I age and my shoulders get older and older, I've considered power chairs, especially for purposes of traveling. I've been, to like New York City and San Francisco, two places that can be very hilly, especially San Francisco. Oh my goodness. I remember one time before our trip to San Francisco, I consciously did extra cardio and weightlifting at the gym leading up to that trip and I was still exhausted afterwards. But yeah, so some tips. One of the most kind of modern or kind of current tips that I'd love to share is related to Google Maps. So on Google Maps, you can actually plug in any, like restaurant or venue, wherever you're going. And there's actually pretty reliable crowdsourced information with regard to different accessibility features of any particular place. So for example, I'll use Union Station, Washington, D.C.'s Union Station. If you plug that into Google Maps, and you click on that first kind of section of information. And by the way, this is specifically on a mobile device. It's a lot harder to find if you're on a computer, but I found this easier to figure out on either Android or iPhone. But you click on that first nugget of information where it gives you, it's like cozy, talks about the vibe of the place. Once you click on that, there is within that a menu that says wheelchair accessible features, things like wheelchair accessible bathroom, wheelchair accessible parking lot. And I've actually found that to be really useful. Now, of course, I would not ever rely on that 100% because although it is crowdsourced, it is not 100% of the time. But that does give you an idea of whether or not that particular, airport, train station, restaurant, bar, whatever it is, might be accessible. So I almost always am looking up places on Google Maps and looking for that feature before I go. Also, like I've already mentioned, calling in advance is really, really, really useful. It does definitely, kind of place the burden on the shoulders of the person with the disability to kind of do that advanced work and that advanced research. But I personally, I've never shied away from that. I can definitely see where it would maybe be challenging if you are, if you've recently gained your disability and you're transitioning from just being able to up and go, without having to do a lot of advanced research. But that's just one thing that I've always kind of been used to. And I think that's probably unique to the fact that I've been paralyzed since I was 3. So it was really transitioning from, seeing my parents do that for me a lot as a wee kid to realizing, okay, well, yeah, if I want to go somewhere and I want to make sure that I'm comfortable, then I should probably, do that research. So that's a really big tip. And then also kind of a more nuanced thing that I really, really wanted to make sure I shared here today relates to renting cars when you're traveling. Actually, so there's 2 things, one with renting cars and one with flying on an airplane. I'll do the rental car piece first. I personally am carless by choice. I can drive. For the longest time, for about 10 years, I had my own vehicle that was outfitted with hand controls that were installed by a local vendor here in Northern Virginia. And that was a great solution for me throughout high school, throughout college, and early in my career. And then I moved to Northern Virginia. I live very close to the DC Metro. It's right across the street. And I realized that I was not ever driving my car. And I was paying a lot of money for car insurance. and gas and inspections and all of those things that come with owning a vehicle. And I said, let me try a little experiment. Let me see if I can not have a car. There's a grocery store right across the street. I developed a system where I would take a tote bag and hang it on the back of my wheelchair and just, grocery shop, go along my way, and then roll right back across the street to get home. And so this system worked for a while, and now it's almost 8 years later, and I still have decided not to buy a car because I've actually been really, really, really adept at, since I'm already a planner in that way, it's no big deal to me to have to plan ahead if I want to leave town or go on a trip. And therefore, back to the point of renting a car. A lot of folks don't realize that all of the major car rental companies, literally everyone I've ever used, Avis, Hertz, Thrifty, Enterprise, Dollar, Budget, any of the major companies have a special number that you can call after you made your reservation. And once you call that phone number, usually it is 48 hours in advance, you can request a left-hand control or a right-hand control and or a spinner knob for your steering wheel at no additional cost. And
How do you find that number?
So for me, like the way that I found it first was through Enterprise. I Googled Enterprise hand controls and it was one of the first things that came up. I'm happy to, because I know in my phone, I saved the one for Hertz, one for Enterprise, all of the ones that I use somewhat frequently. I literally just keep them saved as a contact in my phone. And so I'm happy to, kind of consolidate all of those and share those with you if you think that'd be useful. But yeah, that is one of the biggest tips that I could give, because not only is it useful for me locally as someone who does not own a car, but also when I'm traveling somewhere else, that peace of mind of not having to constantly rely on an Uber driver to safely stow my folded wheelchair in the trunk. Like that is the stuff of my nightmares. I've had so many issues with Uber drivers, Lyft drivers, any kind of ride share where, you're really putting your life literally and the quality of your medical device in the hands of a complete stranger. And that's not always the best way to go. So whenever I travel, I do always try to, well, not always, but I prefer, I guess, to rent a car so long as it's affordable. And then another piece or tip that I'll share with the car rental aspect is that hand controls can only be safely installed on cars that are of a certain size. And so with most rental car companies, you can reserve the most affordable or the smallest class of vehicle, and they automatically give you basically what's a double upgrade in a way, because they call it a full size level of vehicle. That's what they usually will install the hand controls on. So that's always a nice little life hack, is that you get a little bit more extra space in your car that you're renting and paying a reasonable price, because they want to make sure that they can install that hand control as safely as possible. So when I rent, I'll make that reservation online, just as any able-bodied person might do. And then I'll pick up my phone, find that contact number and call the number, give them my reservation number, and request a left-hand control spinner knob at 1 o'clock, because that's my preference. And then finally, I'll share about flying. When it comes to flying, I always make the joke with loved ones that I never feel more like a VIP than when I am in an airport. I feel like I am like a famous president or something, because it is, if you plan ahead, it is one of the more accessible avenues to receive customer service. Now, granted, I've had many issues with my chair not necessarily being treated the best when it comes to being stowed. I'll come back to that in a moment. But back to what I said about planning ahead. I cannot highlight that enough. It's so important to, when you're making your airline ticket, to say that, I cannot, or me personally, I would say that there's a box where you can say that you cannot traverse stairs and that you would like to request assistance from the drop off from the baggage check all the way to your gate. And so they'll assign you someone that can help carry your bags if you would like, and help you push your wheelchair, etc., things like that. And then also, one of my favorite pieces of flying is the pre-boarding process. So of course, folks with disabilities, if you have a disability, if you have a small child, you can pre-board, which then gives you the opportunity to board before anyone else, sometimes even before or alongside those who are traveling in like the business class or first class. And so that eliminates a lot of the stress and the hustle and bustle of, being like, oh my gosh, is someone waiting on me? Am I not moving fast enough? Because those are all things that, again, of my nightmares of, the able-bodied person behind me, like feeling like they're being inconvenienced. In my the more that I live, the more I care less and less about that kind of stuff. I'm like, I'm going to take up the amount of space and time that I need so that I am comfortable, and then we can continue on with the show. But with airlines specifically, calling ahead, letting them know what your needs might be, I've found that to be really, really useful. And then last things, I feel like I've been talking forever here. I've actually developed a sign that I zip tie to the wheel on the right wheel on my chair and the left handlebar in the back of my chair that is pretty succinct, but it basically states, please treat this mobility device as if it were your own legs. And I actually have an image with a circle that instructs them where to pick up my chair. Because a lot of times folks think to grab it by the spokes or to grab it by the armrest, which in some instances with a lot of manual chairs like mine can just pop right off. And that's a one-way street to immediate damage to my wheelchair, which of course can ruin any trip, whether it's for business, vacation, etc. So I'm always encouraging and reminding folks that if you're still with your chair, when that person comes to pick it up, like just be nice to them. Like say like, hey, can you please be nice to my chair? It's really important to me. And then I have that sign on there that speaks for me when I can't.
I like that.
Yeah, so all in all, that's been really useful to not have too much damage to my chair over the years of being on planes and in and out of Ubers and things like that.
And I do want to say, and I'm looking for your feedback on this, don't leave the airport if you get your chair back and it has been damaged, because once you leave, they're not responsible for that damage. So even though, you got a cab, you've got to get off your rear, you've got all these things, your bus is leaving because you're going someplace, airport, until that damage has been assessed and acknowledged by someone at the airport.
That I couldn't agree with that more. It's funny, growing up, whenever we would like get food and like all my family, like my siblings and my parents in the car, my mom would always like remind my dad to check the bag of food before you pull off, right? To like make sure, inspect your order, make sure it's all there. Same exact mindset with your mobility device as you're leaving the airport. And I personally will get out of because I can transfer fairly easily out of my chair. I will transfer out of my chair and do a full 360 and lay eyes on it, check the brakes, check the, where my wheels come on and off. And that's any, rigid frame or collapsible wheelchair. Always check all of those pieces that you expect to work. Make sure that you do that before you leave the airport, because otherwise it is going to be a nightmare and probably, tough slim pickings if you're going to try to do any kind of accountability or I forget the term, but any kind of claim for wheelchair damage.
Yes, absolutely. And there's somebody who wrote in, you had mentioned about you can go on Google and you can look at pictures of places so you can kind of see what the access ramps are and that kind of thing. Somebody wrote in that there's another site, XLab, AXSLAB, which shows places and other accommodations, access and stuff. There's a couple of questions about people wanting to take riverboat cruises. So do you know of any that have been predetermined to be accessible? Are there any resorts and tropical destinations that you know of? And so, do you know of any tropical destinations?
Right. Yeah. No,
I'd like any of those.
Yeah, off the top of my head, I don't have any personal experience with any cruises that were specifically accessible. I've only been on one my entire life, and it was fine. Like I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. So I can't give a reliable recommendation. But one thing that I will say is when it comes to any kind of like tropical water beach kind of vacation, I always recommend an all-inclusive kind of environment. That's because, again, as I've said many times today, do your research, call ahead, ask those questions way before you book. But in an all-inclusive environment, our friend recently celebrated their birthday in Mexico. And being all-inclusive and just being all in that one location was actually did leaps and bounds for like my peace of mind and the anxiety that I would otherwise have of, oh my gosh, are we going from this place to that place? Like everything being all in one kind of campus was actually really, really useful. And then the particular resort, I don't feel the need to name it because again, it was fine. It wasn't anything incredible, but one reference that I would one resource that I would really recommend is a website that I use all the time. if you Google Curb Free with Corey Lee, Corey Lee does a really, really good job of having all of these different types of vacations that he's gone on, that he's giving his own personal recommendations on. And I believe Corey uses a power chair. I've never met Corey. I follow Corey on Instagram, and definitely I've reaped the benefits of all of his hard work on their blog. So I hope I get to meet Corey someday. But yeah, Curb Free with Corey Lee. I believe he had an article about cruises specifically, so I could recommend that if you want to do that research.
And there are some sites that talk about accessibility travel where they even have an attendant that will go with you in different locations and that sort of thing. So you can look up disability travel and you can get some information there. Some I've heard are wonderful, some I've heard are not so wonderful. I would love to tell you which are which, but I just don't remember now because it comes to me at different times. Tom writes in, to be sure, if you have a power chair, to be sure to remove your joystick, as they often break off. Now, there used to be a time when you would see the airline workers, riding in the power chair to get it on the plane and stuff, but they've done a lot of sensitivity training and cultural training to make their employees more aware of people with disabilities. That power chair is your means of getting around. The manual wheelchair, like you say, it's your legs. It's your means of getting around. You don't want somebody out there having a fun time taking it for a whirlwind around the air. That's so disrespectful. It's just disrespectful. And I think they're trying to do that, but you still see that at times. So be sure and check your equipment before you go. Somebody said, what about a fold and go type power wheelchair for traveling? Well, if that works out for you, that's good too, but just always check your equipment, because that's going to be very important. Because if your chair gets damaged and you're out and it's like, oh, this happened on the airplane, but you're already gone, you're kind of out of luck there. So we're going to switch gears a little bit here and talk about your advocacy work, because that is important as well. Travel is something that we could go on for this. We could probably do a whole day thing on this. Travel would be just fabulous. But thinking about your advocacy, because somebody wrote in and they had a very legitimate question about, what do you say to those people that are just over the top with their comments to you? Now, that's very specific, but if you could talk about your advocacy and then how you deal with that kind of, I call it harassment. It's, why people say things to other people, just sometimes it's just beyond me. If you're paralyzed, if you're not paralyzed, people just say horrible things. Why people feel like they should offer their opinion 24/7, I do not know. But tell us about your advocacy and how you deal with situations.
Absolutely. So I actually would love to address that question directly. Like you said, pretty specific, but I think that it's something that we all in this community, if we haven't encountered yet, we probably will. And there are really two distinct ways that I approach those kinds of situations. Literally, I will also call it what you call it, harassment. The most common way that I address it is literally by ignoring, by paying it actually no mind, no attention, just moving along my day as if that literally didn't happen, as if I didn't hear whatever comment that was. The most common example is, hey, keep the speed down, as I'm rolling around in my wheelchair. Like, I've also got a luggage carrier on the front of my wheelchair, just two little bars that fold down, and my suitcase can come across the front of it. And it weighs down the front of my chair a little bit. That distributes the weight a little bit more evenly, which means, yeah, I can end up going pretty fast across those smooth airport, floors. It's really, really nice. And it's pretty efficient, if I say so myself. And so, yeah, the number of times someone said, like, hey, mister, keep the speed down in here. I'm like, you wouldn't say that to an able-bodied person, hustling through the terminal trying to get to their flight. So why in the world are you saying it to me? So 9 times out of 10, I'm just going to ignore it. If I frankly am feeling a little bit more confrontational and I am in a safe space, obviously, usually with other people around, so that I don't feel like I'm alone or might encounter a confrontation that I could not handle, I will actually pause dead in my tracks and ask that person while making eye contact, what did they mean by that? And leave that silence and really encourage them to think about what message they're trying to convey. Because a lot of times harassment in those situations, that type of feedback is really just from a place of harmless joking for them.
Mhm.
But that doesn't mean that is how it is received from the person receiving that feedback, right? So I always encourage people to really just like, okay, so what do you mean by that? And then that encourages them to really stop and think like, oh, I didn't mean anything about it. I apologize. And hopefully that awkwardness prevents them from ever having that kind of interaction again.
Yeah.
And that happens pretty frequently. I'd say probably at least once per trip overall, whether it's at the airport or, on the way to the destination, et cetera. That happens pretty frequently. So yeah, that's kind of how I deal with those situations. On the other hand, to really focus on the advocacy work, my advocacy and my travel really are intertwined. And the reason I say that is I am, again, like I've already said, a person of gratitude. So I'm the kind of person where if I'm experiencing a really positive environment, someone has gone above and beyond in terms of accommodations and somewhere is like extra accessible, I will literally stop what I'm doing, find whoever is responsible who could use that feedback and give them that feedback. I feel like we live in a culture where, the Yelp reviews and all the social media, 9 times out of 10, someone is only going to go online to give feedback if it's negative because they had a bad experience. And I like to do my very small part in trying to shift that culture and that perspective across the board. A recent example of this, I was in New York City. Me and one of my best friends went to see a Broadway show, and we were leaving the hotel that we stayed at that night. And I just remembered as we were checking out, feeling so like I would be so remiss if I didn't give feedback to whoever was responsible for my stay, because when I made my reservation, I said, I use a wheelchair. I checked the box for a wheelchair accessible room, and the accommodations at this property were stellar. There, even in the sink area, there was that place was more accessible than my own home. I could roll under the sink. The roll-in shower was wonderful. The shower head was adjustable. The bed height was appropriate. It wasn't too high. The doorway, there was a power button to the room, not just to the building, but to the room. I was so smitten. And so I got home. I had the business card from when I got at checkout. Then I emailed the person, and we are continuing in conversations to this day. I'm actually going to go back to their hotel and give a talk to their staff about how important accessibility can be and how it can change the complete experience for someone like us. A lot of the folks I'm sure are on this call who are wheelchair users, it is so incredible being able to just take a shower and not have to call down and say, hey, can you come adjust the shower head for me? Or can you please get those towels that are for some reason on the highest shelf in the closet? Little things like that can really impact your trip positively, and even just your day-to-day as well. So I think from a perspective of gratitude, it's really valuable to tell people when they're doing a really, really great job. So my advocacy work oftentimes looks exactly like that, of a positive experience that I've had where I'm encouraging folks to keep it up. Now, of course, the other side of that same coin is sometimes there are experiences that aren't so great. And so I use this phrase with a lot of my mentees. Instead of calling people out, I like to call them in. So instead of going to social media and complaining on a Yelp or a Twitter post and saying, this place was so inaccessible and they messed up my reservation and my hand controls weren't available when, I had reserved them for. Instead, I will find I'll break it down and try to figure out who might be responsible for that in that organization and call them in and have that conversation and put a face to the name. Because when, for someone to forget, let's use that example, forgetting a hand control on a reservation, or for an employee to put that in the computer the wrong way, that's just a mistake on a Friday afternoon for that employee. But that has the potential of ruining my entire trip, because now I can't safely leave the airport because the car rental that I had reserved is not available and I can't drive safely to wherever I'm trying to get to. So by getting in touch with, that organization and putting a face to the name, now they know, oh my goodness, when someone calls in to request hand control, I should take that seriously, because that, again, like I'm speaking from experience. That has ruined a vacation where I literally was stuck. This was in Nebraska, ironically enough. Carol, hello, if you're listening. She had to drive, one of my best friends in the whole world had to drive 50 minutes. I think I like landed at Lincoln, but she lived in Omaha. 50 minutes one way to come pick me up from the airport because the rental car company had messed up the hand controls. So that advocacy work, I really, again, I try to base it on both sides of calling people in when it might not be the best experience, but also, lifting those organizations up who are doing really great jobs and developing a partnership with those organizations. Because now that particular hotel that I stayed at in New York, I am more than happy to recommend other people with disabilities to stay there, because I know that, or I can assume, I'm very hopeful that they would have the same exact quality experience that I had, just by letting them know that I had a disability and checking the box that said, hey, I need a wheelchair accessible room, and I use a wheelchair to ambulate. One other thing I'll share on that is also with regard to, it was the airline piece and advocacy work on that front. Another piece that folks don't necessarily realize, especially those who might have recently gained their disability, is that if you are checking a bag with an airline, if you have medical supplies in your checked baggage, not only does that, most airlines, in my experience, will waive the checked bag fee for that bag. That it doesn't have to be all medical supplies, it just contains some medical supplies, but also, even if it's overweight, because I've had many times where my wound care supplies have made my bag more than 50 pounds. And I did not have to in any way demonstrate that there were medical supplies in the bag, but I was being honest, and there were. And so I then literally had to just take the policy that I could view on, this was Southwest Airlines, and I could view on their website. And my advocacy, again, is showing that to that person on the front lines, because that employee who's checking the bag, they might not have ever crossed paths with someone who needs to check a bag for medical supply reasons. But now that I'm educating them and doing the advocacy on this very micro scale, in the future, hopefully, if they encounter someone who is similarly situated, they will be able to just have that knowledge without having to necessarily be taught or shown in any other way. So my advocacy work is micro, little things like that, but then all the way, to things like this, working with Reeve Foundation, working with different organizations. And I've done presentations on, like you mentioned, sensitivity training, why it would not be appropriate to, use someone's power wheelchair to drive it, into the stowage area, onto a plane, or anything similar. I've worked with clients, from the government, Fortune 500 companies, all kinds of different groups, to really just try to, again, put a face to the name, and not just be, oh, well, people with disabilities might need this. Like, oh no, I remember connecting with that one person, and now I can, be more sensitive and more aware of different things that might positively impact the experience of someone with a disability while they're traveling.
And what about healthcare professionals? Any words of wisdom for for my colleagues out there?
Absolutely. The older I get, the more that I am not as what's the word I'm looking for? I just, as we all get older, disability or not, we encounter, I think, healthcare professionals more and more. At least that's been my lived experience. And for me, the bedside manner is a kind of an older term, if you will, but it is priceless. It is absolutely priceless.
Yes.
And specifically, I've got a medical team who is incredible with this, and not for lack of me teaching them, but it is also important to consider the whole person. And I would share this advice with both, like with caregivers as well. Is, you might look at someone like me and say, like, oh my goodness, this person has like so much energy and they get to travel all the time, and they must be so carefree, and that's great. But what you didn't see was me laying in bed until 12:30 with my feet up because I had a ton of lower back pain when I woke up this morning, and me constantly having to reach out to my HMO to get my prescriptions refilled for my pain medication, and all of those nuanced things that, again, as a person with chronic illness and disability, over time, you learn how to plan ahead for those kinds of things. But also, when you're providing support to that person who is the chronically ill person or the person with a disability, it is so useful and so meaningful to just have that bedside manner and that patience and that awareness that, hey, if they're being, a little curt or a little short with me in this moment, it might be related to something else that's going on in their life. They might be in a lot of pain right now, or they might, for example, right now in my home office here, I'm looking at a big box of gravity feeding bags. The reason I bring that up is that I do not need gravity feeding bags, but unfortunately, my wound care supply company just sent me the wrong order. So now I've got this big box that is a burden because I've got to eventually carry this back down the hallway so that FedEx can pick it up. And then I didn't get the wound care supplies that I needed. Unfortunately, orders probably just got mixed up, right? So again, I called the company and I said, I understand mistakes happen, but let me just be very human with you right now. This is all of the complication that is, coming down from that little mistake that happened, whether it's, trying to get this large box back to UPS or me going another couple of days without the wound care supplies that I needed. All of those nuanced things are so important when you have a network together, working together to help someone meet their goals, whether it's more independence, whether it's administering their own wound care, or whether it's traveling. It's really just paying attention to those details and being a support system and having patience. So yeah, those are the words of wisdom I think I would give is patience and bedside manner.
Yeah, bedside manner especially. And sometimes I think just asking, how can I best help you? Because maybe somebody has a routine that they do a certain particular way, they've adapted to it, this works for them. And maybe in healthcare, you've learned to do it another particular way. So, always having that open communication back and forth, even saying, this is the way I learned to do it. Is this the best way for you to do it? Or just, asking, because people will be happy to tell you, this is what works for me. And, in healthcare, especially in nursing, we are activity specific in who is the most urgent person is who we care for. But in rehabilitation, there are activities that are time specific. So a bowel program needs to be done at this time. Catheterization can't be wait another 2 hours. It has to be done. So learning all those schedules and all that, sometimes I think healthcare professionals forget that because it's not the way we operate. We operate on a need basis. So we have somebody in here somebody who's written in and they can't get their relative into the neuro eye specialist because the person cannot get out of a wheelchair. And so they're at a state-of-the-art medical center and they contract with Medicare, but they can't see the doctor because they can't get into the chair needed for the eye examination. So, and this happens a lot at the eye doctor, at the dentist, all kinds of at urodynamic testing. You can't get in. Sometimes you can't even get into the exam rooms. Yes.
And trying to balance myself on that chair for that urodynamic test was like, I don't have the core strength. It was so hard. Yes, I completely empathize. Yes.
Yeah. So, sometimes sometimes you just have to go to a different person. I know when I take a relative to the dentist, we have found a dentist, which is a dentist in a hospital setting, but they don't make you ever get out of your wheelchair. Now it's difficult because when you have to tip your head back, that can be a challenge because you have, you don't have the chair and the headrest and all that. But it's a trade-off of getting into the dental chair versus this way. So sometimes finding another place, another facility, and most people will accommodate that. It's kind of unusual. Now, if there's particular equipment that you have to get into the chair for the eye exam or whatever, that it may be that equipment just cannot be manipulated in any certain way. So it's time for somebody else, maybe, or a different facility.
Right. I couldn't agree with that more. The importance, and I'll say this quickly as I know we're coming up on time, but especially for folks who have gained their disability later in life, I find as I've coached people from literally 3 years old all the way up to 60 years old who have gained paralysis specifically. And I've actually found it that like folks who are frankly older find it harder to advocate for themselves. So it's so important to speak up in those moments,
Yes.
find that kind of that strength, because that is one of those things where if you don't put energy into anything else all day, self-advocacy should be it. Because saying, hey, I want a second opinion, hey, I'd like to go to another doctor, or hey, this is why you forgetting this has messed up my vacation. All of that is self-advocacy, just in a different way, shape, or form. And I think that's so paramount and so important.
And you know, you made a good point. Sometimes people who are older, they've learned not to be self-advocates because that would be impolite in their generation. And so it's hard for some people, but people of all ages, it is very difficult. So if you are feeling uncomfortable, if you're having this issue, if you can bring someone with you who can help advocate for you, you know, be your support system or be your spokesperson, that really helps a lot too. I would imagine, Justin, that you're advocating for yourself 24/7, but it gets weary, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's exhausting. It's exhausting. And
It
to,
is.
I am so grateful that you just said what you said with regard to a support system, or, you know, a plus one. The one shout out that I would be so remiss if I didn't give is a friend that I mentioned earlier. Her name's Casey. And when I said earlier, case the place, I actually came up with that term, like kind of thanks to her, because she is one of those friends who, once I showed her that little Google map trip, even if we're just going out to dinner on a Wednesday night, she will check, so that, because she knows that 9 times out of 10, I have to check. So even though she is able-bodied and she knows that it will make me more comfortable if she can text me and say, hey, by the way, I already checked, I already called, their wheelchair accessible. Like those kinds of people, if you, whether it's a partner, a friend, a spouse, a kid, whoever it is, like keep those kinds of people in your orbit, because it can be really, it can take that weight off, you know, on a day where you just don't need that extra little bit of weight that you've been carrying around for 6 out of the past 7 days. It's really, really nice to not have to do those things, because yes, it does get very taxing.
Yeah, it is. It is a great, great friend. Somebody wrote in, and that is really true.
Yeah.
We are at our time, but if people want to follow you on social media, can you tell us how to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. At He's on Wheels is the name. I'm very easy to find on social media. You know, I actually checked earlier this week. My website seems to be having a little bit of an issue. Something about like WordPress, something. So I've got to talk to my IT guy to help me fix that. So unfortunately, the website is down right now, but Instagram, LinkedIn. I know a lot of folks I've actually seen pop up on my phone since we've been sitting here. Thank you so much to those who have connected on LinkedIn already. But yeah, those are probably the 2 easiest ways to contact me, via LinkedIn or Instagram direct message, at He's on Wheels, HESONWHEELS. And then finally, just my email. If you want to shoot me an email, justin.graves@VT, like Virginia Tech, .edu.
All right. So very accessible. So Justin, thank you so very much for being on the webinar today. We have gained so much information. So we really appreciate you taking your time, and I hope you'll come back again sometime.
Anytime, genuinely.
Right.
This is a class. So great to finally meet you, Nurse Linda. Like I mentioned when we spoke, I've been watching the Reeve webinars. They're all archived on YouTube in case you guys didn't know.
That's
so
right. That's
a
right.
lot of great Ask Linda sessions and other folks who have been in this position speaking about their experiences. A lot of them are on the Reeve Foundation's YouTube channel. So could not recommend that enough. I'm already a subscriber.
And so thank you very much, Justin, my new friend.
Yes. Great to be friends, Linda. Thank you so much.
Thanks everyone for tuning in.